GIZ is a proud member of the NDC partnership since many years, and I'm heading the section Climate and Climate Policy within GIZ's Department on Global and Sector Projects. I'm very happy to moderate this session today. And in this session, we will be talking about the social price of carbon. So carbon pricing in low and middle income countries. And as I said, with a particular focus on the social dimension and the question how to make it just. I'm very glad that we have three so far distinguished panelists with us in this session today. Maybe the fourth person will be joining in a few minutes. And before we start the discussion, I would like to give you a quick glimpse of what we will do today. We would like to look a little bit into some of our partner countries which are represented here on the panel to see where they stand currently in implementing carbon pricing policies, but also, of course, to go one step further to explore the question why should low and middle income countries pursue CO2 pricing policies, to look a little bit at what are actually the challenges, but what are the solutions for these challenges, and learn from the experiences of the countries, and to look also at the question, what are the co-benefits and what are the trade-offs? So what influence can CO2 pricing have on other development policies in the countries, and how can the trade-offs be addressed effectively? Now I would like to turn and present our esteemed panelists. We have first here with us Ms. Caroline Aguti Mugisha from Uganda. Caroline is the Assistant Commissioner, Health, Safety and Environment, and the Coordinator for Climate Change at the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development of Uganda. Welcome, Caroline. We have Mr. Khalid Ben Omar from Morocco. Khalid is the Senior Advisor to the Minister of Economy and Finance of Morocco. Also, Khalid, welcome to the panel discussion today. And we have with us Mrs. Ilka Starost. She is working with GIZ. She is heading the project Capacity Development for Climate Policy in Southeastern and Eastern Asia, Southern Caucasus and Central Asia, a project that is under the framework of the ICI, the International Climate Initiative, and commissioned by the German Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. So once again, warm welcome to our panelists for this session. We will now start with a brief presentation that Ilka will be giving us, setting the stage. It will be around 10 minutes. And after that, we will right away dive into the discussions. I'm very much looking forward to that. So please, Ilka, join us here.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome, and also from my side, sincere welcome to everybody, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to set the scene for our discussion. And what I would like to do maybe in a first step is to take one step back and actually remind ourselves, why is it necessary, why is it beneficial to actually put a price on GHG emissions. I don't want to say just carbon dioxide, but really all greenhouse gases. Yes, and on the first reason is carbon pricing indeed is a very effective tool for climate mitigation. Why is it the case? Because of, I would say, mainly due to three reasons. One is it encourages indeed cleaner choices across economy. Secondly, it levels somewhat the playing field, if you want to say so, for green innovation. That means it makes green innovations and green technologies more compatible. And last reason why it is such an effective tool is that it is flexible and it is scalable for different sectors of economy. So that's first reason. Second reason actually is that GHG emissions in general, they are negative externalities of economic action, and in the past, and also, of course, at the moment still, in many cases, they have not been taken into the equation, and they have not been accounted for into global architecture. And actually, by giving a price to GHG emissions, it means actually that those environmental but also health costs which come along with those externalities, that they are actually being put into the equation. Yes. And last but not least, carbon pricing creates financial incentives to avoid and remove emissions. And that means carbon pricing actually makes low emission alternative green innovations, green technologies much more cost effective due to the reasons I just mentioned. Yeah, and by this, it actually also drives investment in carbon removal technologies. There are different ways. I actually share the whole slide with you directly. There are different means of carbon pricing: indirect carbon pricing and direct carbon pricing. Direct carbon pricing basically means you give a certain price to each ton of emission. The example would be carbon tax, or an example would be also the emission trade systems, where you give a certain limit of emissions and a certain amount of emissions, and this amount is not being to be exceeded, and the trade is possible. Indirect means, on the other hand, they aim at making GHG intensive technologies and behavior more expensive. That means you give a price for example, to activities which are very fossil fuel intensive. An example is you, for example, set new standards for the quality of exhaust gas from cars which are run by gasoline. That means you have to invest into the technologies which would clean the gas, and that means in comparison to using alternatives, it becomes more expensive. And there are different means. For example, also means of reducing subsidies for fossil fuel. If you reduce the subsidies, the technologies actually have to face more the real costs, and that makes it also more expensive and gives an incentive again to invest in greener technologies. Yes. What is the state of carbon pricing at the moment? Just to give you a bit of an, sorry, I think I'm too close to the mic. To give you a bit of a glimpse what's the status at the moment. And I just see the two colleagues. If you want to see the slides, you may have to move a bit. You see it. All right, perfect. I forgot about the second screen. Sorry for that. 75 carbon taxes and emission trading schemes, they are in operation by the moment worldwide. So a lot has happened actually, and the existing schemes at the moment, they cover 24% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So that's, I think, on the positive side of developments, lots has happened. Still not that good and still challenging is that the carbon prices themselves, they remain insufficient. So 3/4 of emissions are not yet covered, and on the other hand, the price schemes at the moment, they are not sufficient to actually lead to a situation which would really translate into transformations much stronger towards green technologies. Emerging flexible designs and approaches. Yes, there has been a lot of adaptations and approaches and instruments which are considering the country-specific circumstances or also regional circumstances. And at the moment, there's also one also observes that different carbon pricing instruments are being used in parallel. We may come in the discussion also on this point. Yes. In the past, actually, carbon pricing was mostly applied only to the industrial and the energy sector. This is changing. So one really moves towards looking into covering other sectors. This is in several parts more challenging to do that, but this is ongoing at the moment. And of course, I think everybody here in the room knows about the EU carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is just a very famous example, and it commenced in October 2023. I share here a map with you, which gives you a bit of an outline of just an overview. I will not go into depth here, but just for you to get an impression of different schemes which are applied in countries and also regions of countries. Yes, and of course, the question which is really challenging but definitely worthwhile to endeavor and to ask oneself is how to make it just, how to apply carbon pricing means and yet make it just for the people living in a country, living in a region, and looking at low and middle income countries, that those countries face special challenges compared to industrialized countries due to different reasons. For example, the economic vulnerability of the population is in many cases much higher, just simply because more households are having an income which is relatively low, and carbon prices in the short run, they increase prices. They may increase fuel prices, they may increase certain prices which maybe people need, for example, to go to work every day. They may have to use a car. And coming with that, actually, indeed, many countries, low and middle income countries, they have a very strong dependency from fossil fuels, and the economic development is very strongly dependent from fossil fuels, and there is a high risk by applying carbon pricing schemes without careful consideration that this might lead to economic shocks. Yeah? So one has to really carefully look into that. And what a third argument, actual third point to really consider is the situation that often you face situations that there's limited infrastructure or limited alternatives which to switch to, yeah, for clean alternatives. So I'm living in Germany. If I don't want to use a car, there are lots of opportunities to actually use public transport. It is not costly, it is available. I can really switch without much hassle. That is a different situation in many other countries. So you face a risk if you don't look into clean alternatives to make them accessible, that actually people just have to face increased prices. Yeah, and another aspect which is important, a requirement, very strong requirement for carbon pricing, is actually also administrative and the governance preconditions. Yeah? You need to have very robust systems for emissions monitoring, for collecting the revenues, and also, of course, for enforcing the policies. Without that, it doesn't work. And that means that one has to build up the institutional framework for that, and that is, of course, also something which takes time and which takes resources. Yeah. And maybe the last point on that from my side is there is a strong need, given that one has to expect that households affected by carbon pricing, there are quite a lot, and you cannot leave them alone with that, because that just simply is not an option. That means that revenues from carbon pricing have to be used or should be used carefully also for social programming, meaning that means to consider using revenues to actually buffer or compensate affected households from the consequences of increased pricing, but also to look into so-called revenue recycling. That means you can use revenues which you meaning the state, receive from carbon pricing. You can, of course, use it to invest into infrastructure or use it for pension or whatsoever, but recycling means you can use it already, those revenues, for investing into relevant clean alternatives or clean technologies, which, for example, could open up options for people to, for example, use public transport or use a bike or whatsoever. Yes, and with that, I would like to close my input and hand back to you, Holger.
Shall we move back? Is this working? Yes. So please join me back here on the panel. Thank you very much, Ilka, for this very inspiring presentation, setting the stage for our discussion right now. And now we would like to dive a little bit deeper into the country contexts, to hear from your experiences, but first of all, maybe to start with an idea to say where you are standing currently in the countries represented on stage here. How do you look, maybe Caroline, we start with Uganda. How are you looking at carbon pricing in Uganda? Where are you standing right now? And where do you see also the opportunities for the country in applying a carbon pricing?
Thank you. In Uganda, we are currently developing our carbon market regulations. And these carbon market regulations will definitely include the aspects of carbon pricing. But we already have existing policies in the country that have some initiatives that are tending towards carbon pricing or that are implementing carbon pricing. Because when you look at our environment policy, the environment policy and the law make provision for a carbon tax on cars, but also in terms of offsets. And then also when you look at our energy policy makes a provision on several fronts in terms of subsidies for investment in renewable energy. We are focusing on aspects of efficiency standards for vehicles, electricity, the housing sector, and the appliances. But also, we also have a free connection policy. We have a cooking tariff. So all these aspects are really tending towards aspects of carbon pricing. And during the COVID period, we also innovated some initiatives where we're giving free electricity to the low-income earners, but also the aspects of distribution of liquefied petroleum gas, startup kits to the different households, and we are looking at scaling this up to the different cities within the country. And we definitely work with the GIZ to distribute energy-saving technologies, which is also very critical in this. But also in the other fronts in terms of our climate change policy. Now we have a climate change policy in place, which is really focusing on the aspects of carbon pricing. But also from the social front, we look at our gender policy as a country that really focuses on the aspects of supporting the elderly to ensure that they benefit. They give them a monthly stipend to ensure that they are able to live up to the challenges in the economy. And also within the agriculture sector, there are a number of initiatives in terms of giving agricultural inputs. And this also would really qualify for carbon pricing. So we believe in one way or the other, we are already implementing these initiatives, even without a specific regulation that focuses on that. But really, we are really focused on implementing this. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for giving this first overview. And you also mentioned already the social aspects of the carbon pricing. You mentioned now giving particular attention to the elderly. Could you maybe say a little bit more about how you are considering the social and the just part in the carbon pricing that is applied?
I think really in terms of focusing on the aspects of the social part, in terms of the just transition, focusing on the aspects of improved livelihoods of the communities, we really focus on the aspects of direct transfers. Like we have indicated that, yes, in terms of the elderly, we make a provision, so there's a direct transfer to the elderly in terms of ensuring that they benefit, but also the aspects of subsidies. So we give subsidies in sectors where we really know the low-income earners benefit. So we look at the subsidies, but also tax reforms like tax and credits. But also definitely what is very critical in this that we focus on the low-income households, but also we look at preserving the carbon price incentives and increasing availability of low carbon substitutes and reducing distortion in taxes. So those are the initiatives we are implementing. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for sharing this, Caroline. Now I would like to turn to Khalid and hear a little bit from your perspective from Morocco. Where are you standing actually in Morocco right now, and where do you see the opportunities for applying carbon pricing?
Thank you very much for opportunity. Salam, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I know that my friends from GIZ, they know Morocco, but maybe just a few words about the country and what is doing in this area. So the Moroccan experience is related to a country of 36 million. And just for the joke, maybe you know its achievement in football as the first Muslim, African and Arab nation to reach the semi-finals of World Cup. And if God wills, it will, alongside Spain and Portugal, host the 2030 World Cup. So Morocco is a country that has a strategic position. So it's at crossroads between civilizations, Muslim and Arab civilization, or European, African, and strategically located. We have also rich history. So the current issue related to climate is particular in Morocco because over the past 40 years, we have experienced the temperature rise that would be considered as alarming by the 2100 standards. So we have already got all that degrees, and given to our vulnerability, Morocco didn't wait to take action. So our energy strategy, first pillar is energy transition, which means moving toward clean energy production. Currently, 40% of our electricity capacity comes from renewable source with a target of 52% by 2030. So this transition has been complex but successful, as shown by some projects like the world's largest solar plant in Ouarzazate. We are also investing in green hydrogen, positioning Morocco as a potential leader in this emerging sector. So the second pillar of our strategy is how to address adaptation and mitigation, especially in sectors like agriculture and water access. Morocco's strategy for potable and irrigation water with a budget of nearly 15 billion euros is particularly ambitious. It includes dam policies, but also resalination policy, which is very ambitious, with the construction of the Africa's largest plant in the continent. So there is also other policies in Morocco that go jointly with that energy transition policies, infrastructure, which is very important, and also industrialization. Maybe you know that, but Morocco has currently the biggest port in the African continent and in the Mediterranean, which we call Tangier, and I will come back to it. But also to end this small presentation, Morocco, which is the biggest subject currently, it's the social state. As you know, with COVID, with a lot of crises, I will go back to them. People need welfare state, need social protection, so it's the main topic where Morocco is engaged under the vision of His Majesty the King, may God assist him, to generalize that social protection to all Moroccans, health coverage, and also direct aid to 1/3 of the Moroccan vulnerable population. So that being said, regarding all what happens related to carbon pricing, Morocco has tried to be at the avant-garde and to be a pilot country in our continent, in implemented all climate and transition, energy transition commitments. But in reality, I don't want to be controversial, but I want to raise some issues related to carbon pricing in general in African continent and in Morocco. First is that carbon pricing is evolving globally in a way that disadvantages countries like Morocco, because when you see some countries or regions implementing mechanisms like CBAMs, you still have some countries that are not engaged at all. So for a country like Morocco, who has a trade agreement with United States, with European Union, with Arab countries, Turkey, other countries, and which is a key player in and maritime hub in global trade, we have an issue of maintaining our industry competitivity, for example, in the automotive sector. And this issue is not related only to national trade flows, as people could imagine, but in the case of Morocco, with our Tanger Med port, we have also that impact on global trade routes and transshipment that could be embarrassing if we go to carbon pricing that is not fair to the African continent. And the second issue that I want to raise now, maybe I can come to other issues later, is related to Africa needs of energy. Today, the African continent need development, not tomorrow. So access to affordable energy remains essential for African nations to achieve minimum development thresholds, especially as some African countries are among the less developed globally. So it is in this context that we have this visionary project in Morocco, between Morocco and Nigeria, of putting in place a gas pipeline like a transition solution, which aims to support this transitional energy. We have also the initiative of giving to Sahel countries access to the sea. All that being said, we should ensure that carbon pricing or international frameworks are applied with these parameters in mind. That we still have some countries that are struggling to have access to energy and the energy that they need to the primary stage of their development progress. So these challenges are indeed critical. So Morocco is engaged on that carbon pricing. We are fairly engaged for several reasons, because it's our policy and the political will. We have also that proximity with Europe and this trade with Europe that is important. So if we are not doing it, we will have the CBAMs that will be at full effect. But we are also engaged on the African continent agenda. I will just end by something that is more wide and more political. You know that these reforms of carbon pricing, it's not the state only. You have to go to the institutions, to parliament. So there is also something that is wider related to African continent. We can see it with what is happening, for example, in Gaza, all that genocide and problems, people suffering here. So in the parliament, they say, if you cannot have the global peace agenda, how you can have a global climate agenda? So the people are more suspicious on that. And I hope that we will make the connection between all the dimensions of climate. That is not only economic, but it's also global dimensions related to peace. So in the parliaments, they will be, I guess it's my supposition, in a lot of countries, they will be more suspicious in the upcoming years, because the global agenda worldwide is related to uncertainty and maybe lack of confidence. So we need to improve that confidence, and then we can maybe achieve these ambitious goals for the African continent. Maybe I will go back to other aspects later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Khaled, for taking us to this journey to get to know Morocco a little bit better, including the football team, and giving us these insights. Thanks a lot. And also, there's nothing wrong about being controversial. Actually, it adds some spice to the discussion. I like that. You said that in your consideration, the carbon pricing is not always fair for the African continent. I'd like to pick up on that again. What do you think needs to change to make the system, make the carbon pricing more just and fair for African countries? And I would also, first to you and maybe afterwards from Caroline's side, if you have a view on that as well. I'd be very interested to hear that.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So there is no miracle solutions, but as you know, there is something that we could do. You know, the infrastructure, energy infrastructure, in the continent is the real challenge. Maybe if populations, if they can feel that their energy infrastructure is improving, if they have access to electricity at a good and reasonable price, they will be eager to go and to accept to have a pricing, carbon pricing. But if we still don't have the basic investments, and in some countries they are just struggling to have access to the electricity. Even in Morocco, we have subsidies in cooking gas. For years, we have planned to change that subsidies, but it's impossible to remove them in the current context. So maybe the first thing is that we work on having an improvement of infrastructure with the solidarity also of North countries, European and neighbor countries that could be involved in investment, not only like aid, but maybe as investment that will have a high rate of return. I just give you an example. Morocco has a huge potential for solar energy and wind energy. So our ambition of having 52% in 2013 and currently 40% is something that is reachable for a lot of African countries in the Sahel area. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe over, Caroline, would you like to add something, maybe also the perspective on whether or not the current carbon pricing system is fair, is good for African countries? Is there something you would like to add on that, or?
Thank you. So I think in terms of the carbon pricing, like I think it's indicated that we need to be able to do some collaborations, because if we don't work together as a block, then the aspects of the carbon pricing will become very expensive, because certainly without a clear infrastructure for carbon pricing and clear regulations, it becomes very difficult, most especially for the African countries. And you'll definitely appreciate that many of the African countries are still struggling to come up with specific regulations that will be focusing on carbon pricing. But also you realize that in terms of the carbon pricing, in her presentation she hinted on something, that this carbon pricing is actually targeting specific sectors. And the sectors that we are really targeting are the sectors that are hitting most are the local people. So because you're not looking at particular aspects that would be focusing on maybe methane producing sectors, but your targets are specific to particular sectors that have a very high impact on the local people. So this is likely to be unfair, but also as we look at the transition, it will bring in aspects of stranded assets. So all these things need to be looked at as we focus on the aspect of carbon pricing, because once you introduce a carbon price, definitely it distorts the economy. It may not be long term, but there will be a short term distortion in the economy, because then people will be targeting on how they can shift maybe from a particular fuel source to a renewable energy source. Definitely the stranded assets, maybe if you're saying there is going to be a shift to renewable energy, and then those who have invested in the fossil fuel. So all these carbon pricing issues really have a challenge, and we need to be working as a block to ensure that these initiatives are implemented.
Thanks a lot, Caroline. Now I would like to turn to Ilka again. We've heard a lot about Morocco, about Uganda right now. But Ilka, you're working with a number of countries in Southeastern Asia and the Caucasus. Is there, maybe pick out one of the countries you're working with, share some of their views and the current state of work related to carbon pricing?
Thank you very much. Just for the protocol, it's very complicated. We cover we can work in up to 17 countries in Southeastern, Eastern Europe, Southern Caucasus, and Central Asia, and additionally also in Mongolia. So that's the region basically where we work in. Some of the countries have a very strong focus towards becoming members of the EU. That means they, of course, have a very direct compliance to deal with carbon pricing and to actually get organized with regard to that, actually also with quite ambitious time schemes and clear frameworks. And then there are other countries where we work with which are still very reliant on fossil fuel, dependent on fossil fuel, and there's also actually quite a strong risk that countries may face a lock-in situation at some point, becoming and staying dependent from fossil fuels over the next decades. And the program I'm responsible for, actually what we do is quite manifold, different cooperation setups in the countries, but everything we do actually shall somehow contribute towards advising how it can be possible to plan more ambitious climate policy and operationalize that. Yeah, so come from the theory but to the practice, translate that, and actually our contributions in most of the cases is really something to advise and cooperate with our partners on this operationalization question. Yeah, how is it actually possible in order to allow for well-informed decision making? Yeah, if you have to make a decision on mitigation targets, I mean, you know very well and much better than me, you have to know what it costs and what the implications are and what does it mean, how to reach it. That's what we do. And one of our partner countries, for example, is Mongolia. And Mongolia is a country which is, on the one hand, very dependent from lignite, energy sector. It's a country which faces quite harsh climatic conditions. Those winters are very strong. I just very recently was there, and temperatures are now dropping, so people have to be warm during winter time. And it's not that easy to solve that from a technical point of view with renewables. It's possible, but it's not easy, meaning it's also cost intensive. And there's, on the other hand, a huge potential for renewables. And the discussion on policy, climate policy planning in Mongolia is very challenging. And the project I'm responsible for has been lasting for quite a while. So we had a chance to cooperate on the NDC2 process. Yeah, so follow the discussions. And one experience we made was that in order to make decisions, you have to really take time to understand what the tools are. And for example, carbon pricing, as I said, and I'm really convinced about it, it's a very effective tool and a very effective possibility to mobilize ambitious climate action. But you have to understand it, because when you talk about carbon pricing, also in Germany, I mean, you know, the discussions, then people understand price. They understand pricing, they understand, oh, that's costly, and that will, as it's just not an option. And political decision makers also think in that way, as long as they don't understand what opportunities open up. So what we decided as a lesson learned from those first discussions and understanding that this, you know, decision makers are hesitant to make ambitious mitigation targets as long as know-how is not there sufficient, then we agreed that we would look into the carbon pricing topic a bit more in detail. And we did cooperate with the Ministry of Environment, then Ministry of Environment and Tourism. It's now a climate change ministry actually in Mongolia, the Ministry of Economic Development and the Bank of Mongolia, and actually now also other actors on this as a question in order to actually just understand the topic a bit more and model scenarios for Mongolia. What would it mean for Mongolia if a carbon pricing scheme would be implemented? And of course, and again, you know from practice much better than me, you have to look into different scenarios. Yeah, what would happen if we did implement in such and such manner? And two scenarios were elaborated for Mongolia, and actually we did invest quite a lot also in trainings, concrete carbon pricing trainings for experts from different ministries, and to dive really into the discussion. Yeah. A policy paper was developed which outlined recommendations, and I must say that was a very tight cooperation. That was not something done on the green desk, and that's why it also took quite some time, yeah, to really work on that jointly. yes, recommendations were shared. It's just very recently when I was in Mongolia during a final event, because our program comes to an end. And actually, I must say we benefited very well from work which was done by other GIZ colleagues and actually also the Mercator organization. They elaborated a so-called carbon pricing incidence calculator. And that carbon pricing incidence calculator allows you actually to really look into what happens if I use carbon pricing means differently, meaning I can consider different compensation mechanisms, I can consider different pricing of carbon, different organize different ways how different households are being affected, and look into that. And I think that is something which really made a change, because with that you can discuss and people understand that actually there can be really good benefits from introducing such a scheme, and it doesn't mean that the poor households are all affected, but if you do that in a good way, it can be really beneficial. So that opened up really the discussion, and the further cooperation beyond our program now was agreed, and I believe it was really worthwhile investing it. But maybe to sum up, I think one has to take the time. One has to take the time to really look into the topic and get everybody on board who at the end also makes decisions about it and who will be affected.
Thank you very much, Ilka. So to inviting us to Mongolia. I can confirm that the winters are cold there. I've once traveled there in winter, and it is definitely true. I have one question for you, a follow-up question, but I wanted also to invite the audience afterwards. If you have some questions you would like to get involved in the discussion, please just raise your hand. It's not a closed circle discussion. Okay, perfect. Before I get to you, I just wanted to ask Ilka again. You already talked a bit about the social dimension, no, of introducing the carbon pricing in Mongolia. But it's not, could you talk a bit about the challenges as well? Because it's the challenges related to that. Because it sounds easy. If it is so easy, why is not everybody doing it? So were there challenges on the way? And if there were, how did you overcome them?
I mean, the Mongolian example is only where we started, where first steps were started now. Yeah, so carbon pricing scheme is far from being implemented. But I think challenges are indeed that you have to consider carefully how to apply carbon pricing, because, for example, and I didn't mention it, I forgot to mention it in the presentation, there's always a risk of trade-offs. Yeah, so there is really also a risk, if I don't do that sensibly, that it may lead to adverse action. Yeah, people, if they have to pay a lot for gas, for example, they may switch not to a clean solution because simply it's not available, but they may switch to the available wood resources around their communities. And then this is of course not what is wanted, because then, you know, you lose maybe forest lands, and this is, yeah, and one of the adverse effects which can happen. And I think that's a challenge, to really try to understand everything. And in my opinion, it means you have to communicate with people and try to understand really the situation of those who will be affected by the price. So that's a challenge. Besides, I would like to underline, I think it's really worthwhile to look into it because of the opportunities that it offers, even for countries which have a long way to go to become carbon neutral.
Thanks. I think a very important message, no? To understand well the structure before you can implement. Now I will put over to you. I'll give you the microphone.
Good afternoon. My name is Triza Auma from Kenya. I am the founder of Poverty Eradication and Sustainable Action Aid. And thank you for this opportunity in this important conversation. So my question is, many low-income and middle-income countries that are already experiencing poverty, especially the elderly persons and persons with disabilities, which are my area of focus, face additional hardship in carbon pricing policies. So how can we design carbon pricing mechanisms to ensure that revenue can be reinvested in a way that that directly benefits the most vulnerable. And that's my question. And I have a request as a representative of grassroots communities in Kenya. I would appreciate maybe resources and partnerships with organizations that already have experience in implementing carbon pricing models. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And I would open up to our panelists. Does one of you want to reply to the question? First of all, Eric, the first question. The second one was more a call for cooperation. Khaled, you want to start?
Indeed, we perfectly see the point in African continent. So maybe one of the things that we can use to make this carbon tax related to these vulnerable populations is to have that direct the funds with the budget tools and the tax tools directly to the vulnerable population. So in Morocco, we have budget funds that are could be funded directly by some taxes in the social protection, welfare state area, vulnerability area. So maybe one of the things that could help in visibility, it's not a miracle solution, but is to, from the beginning, for example, half of the tax or a big part of the tax is affected or is directed to this kind of program and populations because it's very important. But indeed, the problem is that if the tax is blind and if the tax is wide, we still have a problem. For this reason, one of the maybe solutions is the graduality. There is no issues to go to some sectors that are highly that have high revenues and where their competitivity is not at risk. But if you go to, for example, sectors that are related to SMEs, to the actual economy, and you put a blind tax, you will have issues. Not only because you will touch the competitive of the companies, but also because, for example, in my country, 80% of the jobs they are on very small SMEs. So you will put entrepreneur at risk. So here you have also to make a gradual approach to decide which sector to cover or not to cover. It's also a kind of social targeting tool that we could be interesting to use.
Maybe what I can make a contribution that I know that many of the countries now have started developing just transition frameworks. And I know that for the case of Uganda, we have developed a just transition framework which is going to our national development plan. So that means in terms of prioritization of the proceeds from the carbon pricing, the aspects of the just transition plan and the principles in there will apply. So the focus should really be on those sectors that have a direct impact on the vulnerable groups. Definitely the aspects on subsidies on energy is very critical, aspects of water, really the basic needs. So really we need to focus on our just transition plans as the countries, but how does our national development plan align with that? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yes, there's another question here, please.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Elijah. I'm from Equity Group. It's a financial institution in Africa, so we cover around 6 countries, and the headquarters in Kenya anyway. Yeah, so I like to resonate with Ahmed, I believe, as far as we need to avoid possible blanket taxes on carbon. But more importantly, I'm just thinking is we have a lot of institutions, rather than polluting, we are actually having a couple of developers who are really working towards positive climate technologies with the focus of getting carbon credits and unlocking carbon finance. And we are actually in a situation where some of these project developers. They have been registered under either compliance or voluntary markets, and they're having stranded carbon credits where they're really struggling to get buyers. So even before we talk about the pricing element, we have companies who've done good. They have tried all that they could with the bigger promise that you can unlock carbon finance if you go through this market mechanism, get registered, get issued, tick all the boxes. But now they are stranded. So they're coming actually to like of ourselves, like banks, asking us, can you actually connect us with global buyers of these carbon credits? We are looking at this amount of carbon price that will make it actually business sense based on the investment that you have done. So we're having unfulfilled promise as far as carbon finance is concerned and carbon flows are carbon revenues are concerned. And that is number one. The other thing is on sharing of benefits of these positive interventions, right? So we have entities that have gone ahead. They have developed projects. Some of these entities, they're not seen to be locally originated, as an example. So the disconnect has always been revenues that are generated from carbon markets are not being shared proportionally with the communities who are actually the executors of the technologies. Then when it comes finally to how do we check our sectors as far as to ensuring that they don't emit, I think my comment or rather my proposal will be, before you put a tax as an example, you have also to benchmark our industries, for example, with the European industries, so that you don't blanketly say, if you emit, this is the tax. No, there has to be like industrial standard that beyond this level, that's when the tax gets into effect, as an example. So that you don't blanketly say, because you emit, you get taxed. We have to appreciate that you're in different, for us to incorporate the just approach, we are on different emission scale, as an example, right? Let's get to standardize. If it's maybe cement industry, this is the standard emission. Beyond this, you get to be taxed, so that systematically you approach this pricing approach. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for those comments and insights. I think that adds to the discussion, but I'm afraid we're already almost at the end of the 1 hour. We will have to finalize on time. I would like to turn once again to our panelists and just to ask you if there is one takeaway, take-home message that you would like the audience of today's session to take with them. Which would that be? Who would like to start? Very quick one, and then we will close afterwards. Can be one of the messages that you have already presented before, can be something you heard today from other panelists. There's one takeaway.
The key message is that carbon pricing has a big opportunity for us to reduce our carbon emissions as countries, but is also a source for innovative financing. So it is very critical that we follow suit, but we need to make sure that the infrastructure and the regulations are in place to enable us to benefit equally. Thank you.
Maybe the keyword for me is coordination between African countries, LME countries, low and medium income countries. Why coordination? Because we still have a lot of spillovers and risks in these approaches for our countries, and we still have development needs, peace needs that are urgent. So coordinating on that aspect will be something that is very important. Until now, we're still not. I'm not sure that in, for example, the African continent, we have any coordination on that issue of carbon pricing until now, to have some kind of mechanisms that create a consensus. So coordination is important for me on that topic.
To make it very short, and from what I just heard, I would say my main message would be there are, on the one hand, lots of options how you design carbon pricing, and there's really a world of opportunities and of course challenges, but I want to say opportunities how to design it. And on the other hand, there are loads of opportunities and possibilities what you do with the revenues, from simply paying it back to investing it into really fostering the decarbonization process in the country, and a lot of in between. So I would invite really it's always worthwhile to look into carbon pricing options and to use all the opportunities.
Thanks a lot for... Is this on? Yes, you can. Well, thanks a lot for summarizing, I think, this is really well, the outcome of this discussion. So I take away the opportunities, which are definitely there, the coordination aspects. I noted down also before, which is almost obvious, but I think it's still important to state that the carbon pricing mechanisms need to be tailor-made for the context of each country. There's no one-size-fits-all, but we need to make sure that it is really fitting to the economic, to the institutional context of a country. And the second point I'm also taking is to address the distributional effects, to simply be aware that the impacts of carbon pricing will be different among different income groups, different groups of the population. So it is absolutely necessary to have a good understanding of these underlying effects and what are the potential impacts, distributional impacts of carbon pricing. With that, once again, I would like to thank our esteemed panelists for sharing their experiences and their views with us today. I would like to thank you, the audience, both here in the room as well as the people who may have joined us online. And of course, thank the NDCP for providing us this space in their beautiful pavilion. Thanks a lot and have a good afternoon.